Hi, I'm Julie Ross.
And I'm Gregory Abbey.
And you're listening to the Parenting Horizons podcast.
Julie is a longtime parent educator and counselor.
And Greg is an actor, writer, and director, and more importantly, a parent just like you.
Through conversations covering a range of different topics, challenges, and roadblocks, we hope to give you a few of Julie's tools that might just help make parenting a little bit easier.
Look, nobody's perfect, and parenting is challenging, to say the least. With a few skills under our belts, though, we might just be able to be good enough parents and enjoy the journey and our children a little bit more in the process.
Hi, it's Greg. I just wanted to hop on real quick and mention that since we recorded this episode you're about to listen to, the Russian invasion of Ukraine took place. And as this is an episode about the different invisible anxieties kids are dealing with, COVID, global warming, etc., Julie and I wanted to acknowledge that this was now another event for us and our kids to deal with. And although we don't talk about it in the episode with our guest, Julie and I did add a little addendum at the very end where we will address what's going on in Ukraine and how you can best talk about it with your kids. So enjoy the episode, and as always, thanks for listening. Hi, I want to welcome everyone back to another episode of the Parenting Horizons podcast. This is actually a kind of continuation, I would say even kind of a recheck-in of an episode we did a while ago, maybe even 6 months ago, that was called The Kids Are Sort of, in parentheses, All Right. And it was just sort of an exploration of how the pandemic was affecting kids, because it had been going on so long. And at the time, we had a guest on, Barbara Nusbaum, who is with us again. Barbara, can you just reintroduce yourself a little bit for our audience?
Sure. Hi, Greg. Hi, Julie. Great to be back with you both.
Hi.
Hi. I am a psychologist in New York City, and I am in practice where I work with adults and teens, and I work with adults, and many of them are parents. So we've been talking about COVID and their experiences as parents, and I work with teens who are experiencing COVID from their own perspective.
And I just want to give a little context to where we are like today, which is just a really weird time because in New York and I think several other East Coast states, just literally, I think today is actually the day they're lifting mandates for like masks and whether you have to show vaccination status when you go into restaurants or stores. There's kind of now this raging debate around masks for kids in school, and are they going to lift that, and should they do it now? Should they wait? And it's just kind of a weird time because it wasn't but 6 weeks ago that I had COVID, that Omicron suddenly took over, and it sort of looked like, oh my God, we're spiraling backwards. Everything was going back to shutting down. I will, certainly in New York City, there was a week where it was just the week I got it. I got it on Christmas Eve, that it just was ripping through the city, and it was like, oh my gosh, this is happening again, which I think kind of speaks to some of the struggles that myself and other people are having with the up and down of this. I just wanted to share 2 quick anecdotes to sort of get us going on this conversation about not only where our kids are, and to hear from Julie and Barbara and their experiences and their practices dealing with parents, where the kids are right now, where the parents are. I mean, a quick one is just my wife has her own private practice, and I think she saw maybe 12 patients this past Thursday. And she told me that literally every single one brought up feeling tired, feeling fatigued. Whether it was related to COVID or not, it was just like, she goes, I couldn't believe it. I think literally every patient mentioned it. I mean, we're also in the doldrums of February, which I think is part of it. But I think it also speaks to COVID. And then the other anecdote I wanted to share quickly was I'm on the PA board at my daughter Sage's school. And another parent who's on the board actually shared a story about, he was in another community meeting that was an online Zoom meeting with the PTA. And supposedly there's a school downtown, I don't remember the name, where there is all of these fights breaking out in the hallways, fist fights, to the point that some kids have made a YouTube page of these fights, and it's gaining in popularity. But what the parents said was not only was that kind of disturbing, but that the interaction on the call not only from the PTA parents, literally the leader of the PTA, but the parents themselves, he said, was so out of hand and so bananas that he couldn't really believe it. And I think it kind of spoke to where we're at personally and how adults are dealing with each other and people's level of patience and fatigue, which seems to have gotten out of hand in ways. So I guess why don't we start, and maybe you both can speak to, now 2.5 years. Maybe March is going to be. Is March going to be 3 years we've been in this? The start of this, maybe. Am I
No, I think
wrong?
March is going to be
22. Yeah.
2 years.
Or it could be 3, or it could feel like 10. I think
Right,
that
right.
was
So go-
not an unmeaningful slip,
Right.
Greg.
Have we been in this for 17 years?
Yeah.
So why don't you start, Barbara, and maybe just talk a little bit about where the kids are, and are the kids all right?
Well, I guess, Greg, I want to actually, in a non-confrontational way, stay where you are, because I think what you were just saying about the parents is actually very related to the kids, but I do want to stay with that because two specific conversations come up for me when you say that about people being exhausted. The words that have come up with parents for me this week, with one parent, is feeling on the edge. And when you think about feeling on the edge, one of the things that came to mind for us was being on the edge of a knife, like feeling that real edge, that cuttingness of day-to-day life. And then also how on an edge you fall to one side or the other. There's no compromise or gray area in between. And we were talking that people are so exhausted and so tense. It's exhaustion and tension from being exhausted and on hyper alert in the last 2 years that I think people, kids, adults, are very edgy with each other, quick to react, and it's like one side or the other. You're either for masks or against masks. You're for those people, against those people, and there's a lot of reactivity. And I think it's with adults, and it's with kids too. I've heard about fights in my kids' school, in a lot of schools, where
Exactly.
There's just a lot of tension.
So when you say falling off the blade, meaning that the ability to sort of have, and I think that this is what this parent was speaking to in this meeting, was that like the ability to have kind of nuance and listening and compromise, you mean that's kind of eliminated? It's really black and white in terms of kids, adults' emotional reactions sometimes?
Yes, and I would add a super important word of patience and the ability to pause. And I think that comes from the lack of resource. We all know when we're listening to something that doesn't hit us right or is in conflict with beliefs or even what we want to do, you kind of have to do a bit of internal work to say, okay, deep breath, pause, listen to the other person. And you need resources for that, internal resources, to have that patience, to even have that thought. And I think we're all so afraid that, there just isn't as much resource left.
Right.
So worn
I think
down.
so worn down. And I think it's in part due to having to acclimate and reacclimate and reacclimate. It's not like this has been one thing where we go, okay, got it. It's, COVID, here are the protocols, we'll stick with these. Then it switches. And the next day it's like the numbers are up, the numbers are down, the deaths are up, the deaths are down. There's a new variant. And that's a lot to keep coming at us and having to constantly kind of shift our footing based on whatever the territory of the day is. That's a lot of having to deflect. It's a lot of having to absorb. And I think particularly kids and tweens and teens, I include them in the kid category, are not particularly, they don't have the life experience that we have, and we can't even deal with it.
Right.
It's hard for us, and they don't have the life experience. I'm also mindful of, Greg, it was interesting that I had not heard that about the fighting that was breaking out, but I'm mindful that aggression is a sign of depression
Right.
And anxiety, Julie.
and anxiety. Yet depression and anxiety are often
Yeah.
comorbid, right?
Yeah.
And if people don't know what that means, but they often come together.
They partner in not a good way.
Their partner. Thank you. That's not a good way. Exactly. Yeah. So that kind of follows in line with what I've been seeing in my practice through the eyes of the parents, of course, is that kids are depressed. Kids are anxious. Kids
Right.
I don't know that they're doing so great. I've had a lot of kids have to be hospitalized. There's a lot more cutting than I've heard of before. There's a lot more residential inpatient treatment centers being utilized. I don't know. It doesn't feel common to me or typical of what it was before COVID.
I think anxiety, I have seen anxiety in particular amped up. And certain kids who really struggled during COVID are still struggling. And I don't know if we can speak anymore to what it was like before, as if we're going to go back to that, because I think what's going on with kids, it's the anxiety of COVID, what they've lived through. Now they're coming out. And I see this with teens who I primarily work with, but they are coming out, and part of them are thrilled to be coming out. But they're also, another part of them is coming out into a world with a double existential threat. And when I say existential, I don't mean philosophical. It's like actual life, death threat of coming out into a very anxious world that was COVID and global warming and climate change. And I think anxiety levels are up. And also kids are much more sensitized to the language of anxiety, depression, mental health. It's all over YouTube, TikTok. So they're
Right.
also more aware of it. And I think in a good way sometimes, but also sometimes that social media is another way social media is amping up kids' anxiety. So there's an identification with it too.
Yeah, and it seems like the other thing at play is, like, I'm sure there's kids that have, I mean, obviously are excited about maybe things opening up if they continue to do so. But I'd have to think there's also some kids that, not that the isolation has been a benefit, but some kids who have enjoyed being like, I don't want to go to school every day. I actually enjoy being home and not forced into these activities. So I think it's kind of both sides. And like you said, there's still so much uncertainty even as we're coming out of it. That's why Omicron was so kind of crazy, because it felt like it came out of nowhere. It came out super fast, and suddenly like everything was turned upside down. And I think that's what you're saying, Barbara, is that still exists. I mean, we're kind of through this phase, and it hopefully is great. I hope it continues to go, and we can maybe lose the masks and be more open and learn to live with it. But that doesn't mean, it's like you're kind of learning to live with the next shoe to drop a little bit. And that's got to be a lot for kids to carry around, I would think.
Yeah, I think particularly because it's a lot for parents to carry around. So kids don't even have kind of the steadfast platform of parents, the parents' emotions and life to carry them through. I think they feel a little, not abandoned, but I think that they feel like they're having to rely upon themselves maybe more than they should have to.
Yeah, I just want to speak to that for a second. I think maybe the word is there's a disconnect socially, communally. I mean, my wife and I have just talked about, I have probably 4 close friends that, before COVID, we regularly, every 4 weeks to 6 weeks, we would get together for dinner and have a communal dinner and talk. My wife has best friends. A lot of them have left the city, but that they would get together and, have dinner at least once a month so they could connect. And that has really fallen away over the pandemic. I think they're trying to, and my friends and I are trying to. I have a friend who has health, he's compromised, so like it's not a choice for him really to go out. And we've done some Zoom meetings here and there. So I mean, that's part of what's made it, I think, difficult for parents. And my wife and I have talked about it a lot because we felt it ourselves. You can start to feel really isolated when you've left that. Because gosh, the few times we've been able to have dinner, or I went back to school and I'm in a graduate school program. So at night I'm able to go with these 9 people and actually have an in-person class, even though we're having we're wearing masks. But just to literally be in connection with people in the same room and be able to exchange ideas and even energy it's such a big deal. And the pandemic not only has killed that, a lot of that, and made it's like, how do we come back from that? Because my wife has talked about how now it's kind of hard. Those rituals have kind of ended and they've had a hard time getting it back going. But gosh, every time we've been able to do it, or my friends and I have figured out, at Christmas, 3 of us did, before Omicron kind of swept through the week before, 3 of us actually met for dinner in the city and we sat outside. Man, we sat there for 4 hours because I think we were all kind of just starved to literally look each other in the face and kind of trade stories about our families or our jobs or our careers, because no one's getting really to do that as much right now.
And I think that's one of the self-care things that adults do that allows us to be stable for our children, right? Because we have to take care of ourselves in order to be there as our kids are going down a bumpy path. And because that's fallen apart for so many of us, I think the kids are feeling a little stranded through nobody's fault, through no fault of the parents, but just because of the virus.
Well, and I think that's such a good point, Julie. And it's the magnitude of the collective trauma, I think, that parents are feeling, on top of what happened with politics starting in 2016 and with Black Lives Matter, that the magnitude of these events that have hit adults, it's been very hard to keep it separate from parenting in sort of a little kind of protected place where you can come from that,
Right.
I'm just being a calm parent, that it's somewhat idealized, but there's been a change of the assaults that as parents we've had to deal with. And so again, I go back to this word where there's just fraying of our resources and resolve, and therefore not being able to attune to our kids in the same way. And
Right.
so it's very interesting for me what you're saying, Julie, that the kids then, even though parents are with kids just as much in body, the kids are going to have to somewhat rely on themselves a bit more in taking care of things when parents just factually can't be there in the same emotional way.
Right. No, I mean, I for sure see that.
Well, and adding to that, Greg, I think you brought up a really important thing about community. Communities just were not there. The school as a community for kids, that's their primary community. They had no community for a year and a half, some more than others. And families didn't have communities. They didn't have spiritual centers, which is a great source of community. They didn't have their chosen families. They didn't have their extended families. And one of the things that I think could be very helpful for parents as well as kids is to really try to help them get involved in community activities. So kids getting back involved in clubs at school, in group activities where they will develop over time some group connections. I think that has been super important to my own daughter, who is 16, that she has had group activities all through the pandemic online. And now in school, she is back doing some of them in person.
I think that's really true. I think it feels like we're kind of setting up the reality of what is, and I know we're going to get to even more solutions, and I think that speaks to one already. But I think it is like the collective trauma, because it's like you said, it's first of all, it's parents and kids, worldwide, everyone's going through it. It's the amount of time that it's gone on. I mean, I don't want to go down a political rabbit hole, but even when I talk to my father, he's fairly conservative and I'm very liberal, we actually have pretty good conversations, but our conversations always come back to how people are talking to each other in our government. And it is sort of disappointing. And I think it speaks to this level of discourse that's going on that's not really helpful. Like, people aren't really listening. And I think to me, it's as bad as it's ever been, and maybe in the history of our government. And I think it speaks to sort of what's going on now with parents. But yeah, I agree with you. I think people are so desperate. It's funny because we're planning the auction for my daughter's school, and I'm on the auction committee, and it looks like we're going to be able to do it in person. And people were kicking around themes, and like now we're just literally calling it a night out, finally. Because it really, and we've hired this MC who's a friend of mine, she kind of hosts these, and she said, and she's been able to do some in-person ones over the last 6 months, and she said it is palpable, the energy in the room, because people are so desperate to have this thing again, which has been gone for so long. So I think it's a really crazy time, because it's not just one thing. It's certainly the pandemic, but it's like pile on this and pile on that, the length of time, the way people are discourse. Then it's the literal isolation, and then it's the confusion. Like, even when I got sick with COVID, I was online. I couldn't really figure out, like, do I test now? Is it 5? Is it 10? Is it 7? Do I stay away from my, and I think the scientists are trying to keep up with it. So all of that stuff, I think, is kind of in this, and I think maybe speaks to, my wife sees kids too, like, that they're struggling with this kind of incredible amount of trauma that's kind of gone on for everybody.
And I think one of the things too, I agree with absolutely all of that, Greg and Barbara too. I think one of the things that I'm seeing is that rebuilding that sense of community for kids is challenging.
Absolutely.
It's challenging, it's challenging, number one, because if you've got a tween or teen, they're not going to want you interfering so much in that. But it's also challenging because what's come to my attention is that the pandemic either stalled kids in their development, kind of froze them a little bit in time. So those kids are very hesitant to get back out into the community. They, it's very bewildering for them because they didn't see life unfold in real time. So it's like, well, where do I belong? As opposed to it being a more organic process where, they're exposed to the clubs at school, or they're exposed to this. None of that happened. So it stalled some of these kids. And the other thing that I see happen is the opposite. It fast forwarded some kids. And what I mean by that is they went from being naive, whatever grade, it doesn't matter, but, a naive kid to going, I've missed out on everything. I'm going to grab it all with both hands and forget the clubs. I'm going to go hang out on the street corner and do edibles.
Right.
And that's a very real thing. I hear
Sure.
about it multiple times per week. So you've got these kind of two groups of kids. One who's socializing in a way that may not be completely developmentally appropriate. They've formed a community that's pandemic based, right? Because maybe they were cut off from their childhood friends. And then you've got this other, group of kids who is a little bit horrified at the leap that they're being required to make from kind of one developmental stage to another. So I think that makes it hard too. It's like you can encourage your kid, why don't you join this club? Why don't you do this? But for a variety of reasons, you may get an answer of no.
It's something that I think ties together underlying those two reactions from kids is the developmental gap, the sinkhole that happened in that year and a half, 2 years
Right.
out of connection, and for teens being with peers, as we know, is like breathing and eating. It's that essential. So the kids who
Yeah.
are holding back and don't want to go out very much, and they're struggling with all kinds of issues, they've lost, in addition to being able to sample things, in addition to what to do, it's how to do it. My experience, I just have recently gone back and seen some patients in my office, and I was struck by my experience as an adult, as a psychologist for over 20 years, how intimate it felt in a way that sort of took me by surprise and took some getting used to. So that intimacy that we haven't had in a while, for kids to get out there, is something really hard, I think, to figure out. And it'll come out in kids. They're not going to say, "Oh, Mom, it was so intimate, hard to be intimate today."
Right.
It'll come out of, I don't want to go to clubs. I don't have any friends, and not really feeling like they know how to make friends, maybe just wanting to stay home. So I think that's one piece. And then the developmental gap and sinkhole that happened for the kids who are acting more precociously, it's still a developmental lag, because they're not knowing how to proceed with good judgment, assessing things. I also think a piece that's gone on for them is that they have watched life online through all kinds of shows, TikTok,
Right.
YouTube, but they haven't lived it. So now they go out and they want to live this life, and they think they know how to do it because they've been participating as observers, but then they're not ready for it. They haven't lived it. They haven't learned through the living.
Right.
Barbara, can I ask you, I feel like you're kind of speaking to this, but I feel like you mentioned before we started recording that, and it maybe is evident even how we're talking about this, but I feel like you said something along the lines of like how tricky this is because it's so kind of multi-leveled and nuanced. Is that kind of what you were saying?
I think this is a very hard time to figure out how to talk about this in its own new way, as every phase of COVID has its own new way. But when I was thinking about what I was going to say today, or what we were going to talk about, I thought, gosh, what is there to talk about? But it's not that there's nothing to talk about. It's just, it's more diffuse and abstract now, which makes it even trickier.
Right.
You know, it's sort of, we're coming out of Omicron, and when we came out of, was it Delta, whatever we came out of, there was almost a euphoria and a relief. And then Omicron came. So now we're coming out of Omicron, and there's not a relief or a euphoria. There's a guarded, possible, maybe little bit of optimism. And I say it that way on purpose. And we're supposed to be going back to our lives, but we're not. So an example with a parent I spoke to. So we're supposed to be going back to life. Well, she has 2 school-age kids, younger school-age kids. So going through a day, everything she has to do is affected by making a tiny COVID decision, and it stops things. So, okay, we're going to go to school. Okay, the kids are fine with the masks, but then when we get picked up from school, we have to go to have a play date. Well, what does that parent, is it okay to have that play date? What does the parent think about masks? So then you've got to negotiate that kind of decision. And then, the next activity, we're going to go grab something to eat. Oh, wait, can we go inside? Can we not go inside? But every decision, if you think about your decisions all day long, it is affected in this quiet, subtle, pervasive way by making decisions about COVID, but we don't even know if COVID's bad anymore or not.
Right.
But also internally, we're terrified of COVID because we've been conditioned by the very terrifying reality the last 2 years. But is it still scary? Should we be scared?
I think it speaks to, and then Julie, jump in, but I think it speaks to those decisions are hard anyway. The decisions just if you were going to school in normal time and dealing with your kids and doing play dates, I think that's what you're speaking to when we continue to speak to like the levels of this, because then you're putting COVID on top of that. I mean, because I feel like adolescence is hard anyway.
You're absolutely right, Greg.
They're going to experiment with drugs and alcohol anyway. Like those are things that come up through history, but now like it has this other label. It has this other layer on top of it. And we are going to get to like, okay, what can we do? But I think it's important to just continue to kind of lay out, these are the complexities and why this is so difficult. Before we do that, Julie, did you want to add anything else?
No, I just wanted to say I think that was very well put, Barbara, that, it is multi-layered. It is, and it's also diffuse, I think you said. And it's hard to get a handle on what do we need to be careful about, or what do we need to help our children with? What is it exactly that we need to be helping our children with? And, or helping ourselves with. And it's like you said, it's these minute daily decisions that come up over and over and over and over again during the day. Are we bringing masks? Are we not bringing masks? Do we need masks? I don't know. Are we going to go into a store? I don't know. Do restaurants require it anymore? I don't know. And I think it's exhausting.
I call it the drip, drip, drip draining. That it's not the tidal wave we experienced in 2020. It's now the drip, 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 constant drip that's draining us.
Well, it's like my wife said, like she really couldn't believe it, that literally every patient she had last Thursday mentioned being fatigued in the session. She goes, I've never had that. Everyone is talking about it, which makes sense.
Yeah,
so
it's
why
exhausting.
don't we pivot towards some of the things, maybe a couple of things, what parents can do for their kids, what parents can do for themselves. I mean, as we were talking, I just want to, maybe I'll speak personally to give us kind of a leaping off point. One of Julie's main themes always through all of our episodes is curiosity. I feel like that's one of her main points always in terms of parenting. I think for me and my own kids is that, I have 3 kids. They each have their strengths and challenges. In particular, one of my daughters is pretty self-possessed. What I find happen is you can take for granted that kids are doing okay. You can take it for granted. My daughter just came off of actually an exchange trip where she was in Spain for 5 months during this. And she came back and she started high school again in New York City. And to be honest, everything seemed like it was going okay. And it was. But then I guess, and Barbara, you kind of mentioned this, but then kids fall apart in different ways. And I think it's not to take for granted that everything is okay, because then she had a night where she was up and in tears and couldn't sleep. And I was suddenly like, okay, everything isn't perfect. And does that resonate for either of you, just in terms of maybe you have a kid that you feel is doing fine, doing okay, to make sure you still have your antennas up and that you're still curious about the experience? And Barbara, I guess, why don't you start?
It definitely resonates, Greg, that and building on what you had said before, that we're going to have this anyway with our kids at the different developmental stages, and maybe reminding ourselves that it's just a little more amped up, that we have to be listening for it. I also think that we need to be listening for the positives, because we are, and I don't mean in a rah-rah way, because I think if we get too positive with kids, one, they can sniff out the inauthenticity. They're so good at that. And it also it can feel misattuned, and then kids can feel quite alone in their very mixed experience. But I think it's very easy, like in conversations, like every conversation starts with a COVID discussion. Then it goes to global warming. Then it goes to politics. We're living in a rough time. And I think that as parents, we really need, look, for ourselves, but for our kids, to be finding the positive moments and the positive things, and really need to put words to that for our kids.
I like that a lot. It's very much aligned with my general optimism as a person. I have a tendency to be optimistic and look for the good in everything, which can be quite irritating to those around me. But I think we need to really adopt a catch them doing it right sort of philosophy. And I don't mean behaviors or even emotions, but like naming what we notice that's positive and that is resilient of them during this time. So it's not the cheerleader thing, because that really, as Barbara said, is we don't want to be yay rah rah. It's just not it's not going to land where our intentions would have it land. But it is noticing and pointing out things that are seen or heard. Whether it's, I overheard you being kind to your brother yesterday, right? Or just the little stuff. Or, boy, I saw that you really studied hard for that test. Naming the things in their life that are accomplishments or courage or kindness, I think strengthens those things for kids and gives them the opportunity to think, oh, well, maybe it's not all bad because yeah, dad or mom recognized that I did such and such yesterday, and yeah, I did that. So it creates a little bit of milestones for them that can feel a little amorphous at this time. What were you going to say, Barbara?
I was going to add, in addition to noticing, so just some other things that on the list that can be noticed, strengths that they have been showing. So, if something is challenging at school, like, if they come home and feel like that day, I'm just not having any friends, and you acknowledge that and you stay with it, but then also at some point keep in the back of your mind, either then or if it's not the appropriate time, to talk about the things that they're really developing and feeling good about, which is going to lead to my next point of things that kids feel good about themselves and noticing. So if they feel really good about having joined a club, like they may not feel good about, the natural friends they've made, but they joined a club and that wasn't easy for them. And, but you joined that club and you felt good about that.
Yeah. And Barbara, you kind of touched on something. I mean, we did a whole episode called Suck It Up, and it's basically about, the importance of parents acknowledging the hard feelings too. And that doesn't mean you have to spend the whole day there. And I think it's great that you say we also touch on strengths, but I think it's probably, you would both agree that it's really important to acknowledge like how hard this is. Like we can't pretend like it's okay. Hey man, it could be great soon. It's going to be great soon. Get out there. It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Don't worry. You don't have to worry. I mean, that doesn't mean you spend all day going, yeah, worry, 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 but it's absurd to not take a moment. To me, that's just going to lessen the anxiety if you're able to say, yeah, this really sucks. This is hard.
Absolutely, Greg.
My daughter was talking about how, Dad, I'm used to wearing a mask at school. It doesn't really bother me, but I got to wear one during every basketball game, and it's terrible. And I was like, that's terrible. It's awful that you have to do that. So I'm sorry, Barbara, what were you going to say?
I was going to say absolutely. And unlike Julie, who's the eternal optimist, maybe it's good to have us together because I tend to be the pessimist. So I have trained myself to find the positives. So it goes for me as, it has to be integrated with acknowledging the difficulty. That just people feel so seen and known for it, and that they don't have to be fixed or changed. You just notice it.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question? And this might be one for parents. And I feel like, Barbara, you might have spoken to this the last time. And I think it's about reframing success and what is considered successful or achievement, especially everything that's going on. Is that something you talked about before? That can help parents maybe and I guess in a simplistic way, like, be easy on yourself. And I think that speaks to like acknowledge the strengths, acknowledge the successes, that we're in like an overachievement country, and certainly in New York City. But does that resonate for you? This idea that coming out of this, we need to reframe what you consider like the kids kicking ass. No?
Julia, you want to speak to that? You want me to speak to that?
You both can.
You go first, Barb.
Yes.
My
Yes.
thought exactly.
That I think we live in an overachieving country, and in some ways it's, I think, out of fear and anxiety, it could be getting worse because we're so fearful. And so we feel like we have to be more and more successful. I actually think it's the opposite. I think if we can acknowledge our fear and anxiety, we can slow down and be more acknowledging and feeling focused on a holistic experience of the present, and not be so far reaching in terms of looking at goals and need for success in the long term, but really helping our kids get to know themselves in who they are now, what their strengths are, and especially for tweens and teens, this is the time to do it. To really get to know what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are. And all of us have weaknesses, and I'm going to use that word on purpose. And then what they like. And they still have to do math. If they don't like math, then they're still going to have to struggle through it. But to really get to know themselves rather than having to be successes, and to be successes at everything. My sense of success is kids getting to know themselves, to be as comfortable in their skin as they can be at this point in time, and feel some intrinsic interest in stuff.
Yeah. No, I agree with all of that. And, I also, a thought that came up for me right then was that parents often project their fear about their child's lack of success. I call it looking at the negative crystal ball. And so they project forward, my kid's anxious today, or my kid didn't want to go to school today, or my kid is upset about whatever, and the masks or whatever. And all of a sudden, it's not just about that moment in time. It's about, oh my God, my child's going to wind up being a derelict under the bridge, shooting up heroin. And I'm like, how did you get from your kid's a little sad today to derelict under the bridge, right? And I'm not even really exaggerating. I mean, instead of looking for and applauding their children's, successes, redefining success, what does it mean? Sometimes for a kid, just getting out the door in the morning is a success, especially during this time. Instead of acknowledging and recognizing that, parents are like, but you came home with a B, or but you chose not to go to basketball practice after school. What's up with that? So and I think it has to do with the parents' fear that their kids are going to become, I don't know, derelicts under a bridge somewhere.
Well, yeah, and I think it also speaks to the idea that we kind of touched on, I think, on the last episode too, is that it's kind of intermingled. So if the parent has their own fear and anxiety and confusion, which of course they do, because we all do, because the kids have lived through this and we have too, that if the parents aren't doing the work that they need to do to, feel okay, at least as much as they can to help the kids. So that's on the parent, whether it is, today we talked about community, like the things you can do, the self-care things you can do so you can show up for your kids in the best way you can. I mean, I know everyone can't afford therapy, but if you're really struggling, if you're struggling in your marriage or struggling personal, if you can seek that kind of help so you can get recalibrated, because otherwise, I mean, Julie always give the analogy about being on the flight, and they always ask the parents, in a state of emergency, you put the oxygen mask on yourself first, and then your kids. So you're there to be able to show up in the way you need to show up.
I just got asked by a parent yesterday. She said, "What's my job as a parent right now?" I was like, "Do you want bullet points on the job description or what?" I said, "Your job is to keep your eye on the destination. Just keep your eye on the destination. You're going to be off course. Your kid's going to be off course. But if you have your eye on the destination, what you want, which is to raise a kid who becomes independent as an adult, who takes responsibility for their actions, who feels good about themselves, at least mostly. Keep your eye on that. And then, when you get off course, you ask yourself, well, how do I steer the ship or the airplane back towards this destination? What can I do that will prop up my kid, support my kid, acknowledge my kid? And to me, most of the time, the answer is listening. Just listen to them. Don't contradict them. Don't tell them that their opinions or feelings or thoughts are wrong. Just listen, because at our core as human beings, it's feeling listened to by someone that creates the community that we were talking about earlier. We need to feel heard and seen. That is so important, to feel heard and seen. That's the way we connect with others, and that's the way our children are going to connect with others.
And Julie, when you talk about the specifics of keeping your eye on the destination, I think getting there rarely has to do with looking at the outside markers of success. It's nice when they come.
Almost never.
But really, it's about not looking outside, but looking at your child and seeing what they need to feel solid and grounded and centered. And as we spoke about last time, it doesn't mean that anything goes. Bring me home an A, a C, or an F, and I think you're wonderful. Everybody gets a trophy. It is not that. But it is about looking at how your child, your teen, whatever age, can feel solid in themselves. About, as you said, being independent, which involves helping them figure out how to solve problems for themselves, how to solve what's in front of them, and supporting them doing that, and listening to them, which means hearing their perspective, as you said, not arguing that it's not the right one, or imbuing your parently worldly advice, although sometimes that helps, although usually it backfires because they say, yeah, well, that's good for you, not for me.
Exactly.
Barbara, do you have some ideas, or can you speak to a little bit, because obviously if your kid is struggling, if you're struggling, if your marriage is struggling, I think therapy is always a great place to go. But not everyone can do that. Not everyone has access to it. Not everyone can afford that. So can you speak to some of the things that people or parents might be able to do in lieu of that?
Well, one resource that I know has been bulked up in the New York City public schools has been guidance resources. And there have been more guidance counselors added, or the intention is to have them more added. Can't say across the board and what the difference is in better or worse resource schools, which I always like to acknowledge. But guidance counselors and counselors have groups that they've started for kids. They have groups. Have had groups for parents. So I think contacting your school, I think the city has tried to offer that, and the success probably depends on the school itself, but I do want to mention that.
Yeah, and I imagine that's probably true across the country. It seems like I'm sure schools are making an effort to put that in place. Julie, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that's a good point, because I think the guidance counselor at a school is often overlooked, and sometimes with good reason, that they're inundated with paperwork and they're not. They don't really function as a guidance counselor in some areas of the country. But I think it's a great starting place for, could we have a group? Could this person lead a group? Or does that person, even wherever you are in the country, does that person have low cost or no cost resources that they could point you toward?
Another resource, if people are spiritually inclined, and I feel like in New York this is almost a thing we don't mention, but I think it's at a cost that there are various spiritual or religious institutions that have youth groups for kids. And kids often, in addition, think they're very uncool, but
Right.
they cost nothing to join. And often they're very not religious, but they're
Yeah.
ways to get together with other kids and led by wonderful people, and is a way to socialize and be part of activities. And kids will resist this; they usually do. But
Sure.
many kids really end up being surprised at how much they like it. It's also a way to connect with kids outside of school if socializing in school isn't going so well. So I think it's something that
Hmm.
we can consider, even if you're not a religious person or you don't have a belief in a particular God, you can still connect with those organizations, and they have a lot there.
And it's just another pathway to community, which I think we've talked a lot about, is
Right.
like, how do we start to re-enter and make those connections? I mean, another one that just occurred to me, the high school that my daughter and Barbara's daughter goes to, they have a service requirement. And my daughter recently worked at a food bank, is out works out of a church on the Upper West Side, and it was kind of amazing. She was definitely reluctant initially, and we went with her a couple of times, and it was kind of an incredible experience. I mean, not only that we were making the meals, but then it was community. There were all these students from
Yeah.
Columbia, and then there were some volunteers. There was like
Mm.
20 people there, and it was pretty amazing. And my daughter even talked about on one of the times she went. I mean, before COVID, homeless people could come in and actually sit and have a meal, but unfortunately now they just have to pick them up. But she said she actually got to participate in even handing out the meals, and I think it was pretty powerful. She talked about it when she came home. She was like, "Wow, that was kind of incredible." I think those kind of service opportunities is just another way to this is, to me, a big part of this is kind of reconnecting, because even the
Yeah.
day that we spent there was kind of like so uplifting, and also just to be chatting with these students from Columbia, and this amazing wild woman who was running the program was kind of incredible and ordering everyone around, and it was just, we've had so few of those experiences, so
Hmm.
I mean, parents were talking about, we're literally at my daughter's middle school finally setting up opportunities for parents to come tour the school, because there have been parents that have been at the school for 2 years and have never been inside it, have no idea what it looks like, haven't met any of the teachers. Like, it's pretty
Wow.
wild. So
That's incredible. Incredible.
yeah, and they're like palpably excited. Today on the meeting, they were like, "Hey, we're setting these up in March. They're going to be for an hour and a half." And people were like, in the Zoom chat, were like, "Incredible, I can't wait, fantastic," because people are just kind of desperate for that connection. I think I just want to wrap up, because Julie and I always kind of do this, and I think obviously this one is hard because what we've spoken to is how kind of nuanced it is, but as we continue to come out of this, hopefully, or go back into it, we're 2 years in. Is there one thing, even if you repeat something you've said, because we've covered a lot, that resonates for you, is like, this is the thing I think parents should keep in mind as we continue to move through this? And Julie, why don't you start, and then Barbara, we can finish with you. No pressure.
Um, no, no pressure.
Can you
One
solve it?
thing,
Yeah, please solve it all, Julie, right now.
in one bullet
And
point,
one
you
bullet
bet.
point.
Here I go.
We're waiting, Julie. We're
Uh,
waiting.
Okay, I'm ready. Uh, I don't think that there's just one thing. I think if I were to summarize what we've talked about today, maybe the highest priority is to re-seek community for yourself and your children and your family. And how that's going to look is going to be different for everybody. But I think the isolation that we've been through, in and out and in and out, and like we never know from one day to the next, are we quarantined, are we not? I think that is taking its toll in terms of emotionally exhausting everybody, parents and kids alike. And I do think there's such strength in having a community that you surround yourself with. And I love your idea, Greg, of seeking that community through service opportunities. That actually hadn't occurred to me, but what a great thing, because you meet a bunch of different people, but you all have one focus, one goal, one task, which is to get these meals out or to sort clothing at the clothing exchange or whatever. And I think that does provide a sense of, I'm not alone.
Mm.
And I think that's what a lot of people are struggling with, is that, again, it's the isolation, it's that feeling of being alone. So I think having said there's no one thing, I just named only one thing. But
Hmm.
there we go.
That's a
I
good
think
one,
it's seek community.
Barbara.
Well, as Julia was struggling and saying, well, it's hard to name one thing, I always feel with these questions that I have to come up with that most perfect gem and the pressure. Um, but I think I have come to a similar place with Julie, and then I'll add to it. In this conversation, we've come to this of seeking community. And the piece that I'll add to this is being very deliberate and challenge ourselves to try to get out of this, I think, default and sitting back in our isolation and in our tiredness. This is going to have to be a deliberate thing because we are now much more used to staying home. We are tired. I'm sure parents are going to hear this and going to go, huh? They're telling us to seek something, to go do another task.
Right.
I want to speak to that because I get it. But I think it's like getting up in the morning when you're exhausted, and sometimes you've got to push yourself out of bed, and you get up and you get out, and then you go out to walk the dog, and it's a beautiful day, and you're like, oh, this feels really good. What a nice surprise. I didn't think I was going to feel this. I think it's the same kind of thing where we're going to have to deliberately push on our tiredness and our isolation and our fears of COVID, and really challenging ourselves. And I'm not going to say what people should do, because we all have our different comforts and risk levels and our different conditions, our physical conditions. But I think challenging ourselves to continue to rethink how we understand this illness. Somebody said to me the other day, this is not your grandmother's COVID. And it has changed. But I think in our traumatic feelings and experience, there's the trauma part of us who is very scared of it. And we have to continue to re-examine that. So I think it's deliberateness in challenging and pushing ourselves for ourselves and our kids.
Hey, it's Greg and Julie. We just wanted to hop back on really quick before we end the episode, because since we recorded this episode with Barbara, which was a couple of weeks ago, we have had the Russian invasion into Ukraine. And on top of the other things that we have talked about on this episode that you just listened to with, COVID, and Barbara mentioned global warming, Julie, can you just talk a little bit about why you wanted to bring it up? I mean, I guess the idea is that this is just another level of instability suddenly that our kids are having to deal with.
Absolutely, Greg. As you said in the episode, Barbara and I talk a little bit about how COVID really, the uncertainty around COVID and the isolation around COVID and the feeling of helplessness around COVID really put a lot of people on edge, put a lot of kids on edge, and as well as their families. And, now that we're kind of coming out of COVID, what we talked about was the idea that even though we're kind of coming out of COVID and that may not be the threat anymore, there are the other threats like climate change. And then, as you said, since we recorded this episode, the Russian invasion of Ukraine occurred. And there's another thing, right, that kids are having to deal with. And one of the things that, since that happened, that I'm seeing is the level of feeling helpless and hopeless and the level of despair has
Mm-hmm.
really risen. And not just for the kids, but also for the parents.
Right.
And so I'm getting a lot of calls about how do we talk with the kids about this war that we have
And
no control over.
how do you how do you talk to your kids about this? Like, what's your advice around that?
Yeah. Well, as with other things that we've talked about, difficult things, it's important to keep it simple. It's important
Mm,
to keep it, develop honest, and it's important to keep it at their developmental level. So I'm not seeing a lot of concern in the younger children. It's pretty abstract to them. But the concern that I'm seeing is with the tweens and the teens and the young adults, because it's not so abstract. They kind of get it.
mhm,
So one of the things that Barbara and I and you talked about in the episode, just in general, was this idea of recreating connection. And I
mm,
believe that still holds true. And it becomes even more important when there's a global crisis like the war. I think that in order for people to not feel helpless, they need to be given action items to do. The problem, of course, with something like the war is that it's not within our sphere of influence.
right,
We cannot do anything about it. We
right.
just are, helpless bystanders. And I think that is the cause of the consternation and the despair. So, to borrow a saying from Jane Goodall, she said, think globally, act locally. Think globally, act locally. And I want to talk about what I mean by that, but also to borrow from Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers said, look for the heroes. And I remember when the Twin Towers went down, right? It was a very local crisis, especially for us here in New York. And what we told the kids was look for the heroes. There are always heroes.
Mm,
So I think that applies when we're talking about the war. I think we need to look for the heroes. That there are
mm.
people out there who are doing good. There are organizations out there who are doing good,
Right.
who are
Places to
working
donate.
who are working very hard. And I think in terms of acting locally, that can be as simple as encouraging your kid to do a bake sale and have the bake sale proceeds go to an agency or an organization that is helping the Ukrainians. And if that's not possible, I think one of the options that Barbara and I talked about in the episode before the war had started still is viable, which is volunteer at a soup kitchen. Do
Mhm.
something for the homeless that are on your streets. Because even though it's not for the Ukrainian people, it makes you feel like you're helping, like you're one of the helpers,
Right.
and gives you a sense of agency so that you don't sink into that place of despair and helplessness and hopelessness.
Right. Especially connected to this where, like you've said, it's so far away from us. It's you can't take any agency directly. I mean, there's places to
Right.
donate, but you can't get involved, maybe in the way you like. And it seems like, I mean, we've kind of covered this before, but in terms of talking about it, it's like meeting them where they are, being curious if they have questions about it, because they might and you might not know, but it's okay to at least bring it up, you would say, to just say, hey, this is kind of amazing what's going on, is that what you would say, like, hey, have you guys talked about it in school, have you talked it about your friends? And they might say, like, no, I haven't even thought about it. I think you're right, like, depending on the age is what you'll get back. But I mean, I guess that's what you would say, right, is be curious, keep it simple, keep it truthful, don't overcomplicate it, but check in with them around it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and I think it's a good idea to say, have you heard about this? Have you been talking about this in school? And if they say no, say, okay, well, if you want to talk about it, I'm here and you can
Mm,
talk about it with me. Or if you hear something about it and you have questions, I don't know that I'm going to have the answers, but we can look up answers together. And and I think most importantly, I think I would say, kids a lot of kids are very good at compartmentalizing, which is helpful in these in these kind of situations, so that they're thinking about their homework or they're thinking about their romantic interest or something, and they're, able to kind of push the world events to the side. But I would urge parents to really, especially because it's this, we've had COVID for 2 years. There's still this looming specter of climate crisis, and
Mm.
now we have this on top of it. I would urge parents to pay close attention to their children's mood. And if you as a parent out there or you believe your child is having suicidal thoughts,
Hmm.
I want to leave in the recording, and we'll also put it in the notes, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline telephone number.
Hmm.
If you're having suicidal thoughts or if you believe your child is having suicidal thoughts, call 1-800-273-8255. So that's 1-800-273-8255.
And I think you and I have talked about this, and my wife is in private practice. It's not necessarily like direct, it's directly connected to the war in Ukraine that this might happen, or directly
Mhm.
to COVID, but I think it's more the idea that with all of these things going on, I know you've talked about hearing a lot about, not a lot, but there's been teen suicides have definitely been on an uptick over the last year. My
Yes,
my wife has talked about it as well, and I think just so our audience understands, I think that's part of why we feel it's important to share this information, because now on top
absolutely.
of everything else, the war is just another thing that kids are dealing with in terms of kind of an unknown anxiety, known and unknown, whether it's COVID,
Mhm.
global warming, the political, landscape of our country, and now a war. So it's a lot. It's a lot.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think a lot of kids are like, what's the point? What's the point in continuing going to school? What's the point in continuing living? I mean, I'm hearing that not directly from the children of the people that I see, but their friends,
Mm.
are confiding in the children of the parents that I do see and are saying, I don't think there's a point. Why bother?
Wow.
The world's coming to an end.
So we got to keep checking in, right?
Got to keep checking in. Got to keep checking in. It's important that you, as a parent, stay attuned to your child. Watch them for mood changes, engage them in conversation if they will with you, and be aware of warning signs that may indicate that they're feeling helpless or hopeless. Thanks for listening to the Parenting Horizons podcast.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please share with your family and friends. And if you'd like to hear more about Julie's work, join one of her parenting groups, or see about individual counseling, please visit parentinghorizons.com. Or you can email Julie at julie.ross@parentinghorizons.com.
See you next time.